My mom threw me out at 17 after my graduation. 8 years later she needed my signature. The June evening should have been warm with possibility, but instead it felt suffocating. I sat in my cap and gown in the passenger seat of Mom's silver Honda Civic, watching the streetlights of suburban Pittsburgh blur past the window. The graduation ceremony had ended 2 hours ago. My diploma sat crumpled at the bottom of my backpack, forgotten. "You're not listening to me, Ethan," Mom said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her voice had that edge I'd learned to recognize over the past year. The one that meant she was already past reasoning, already convinced of whatever narrative she'd built in her head. "I am listening," I said quietly, watching a family unload groceries from their minivan as we stopped at a red light. "Dad." "Mom." 2 kids laughing. "You said I'm ungrateful. You said I don't appreciate anything you've done. Don't use that tone with me." I wasn't using any tone. That was the problem. I'd learned that any response, any defense, was seen as disrespect. So I'd stopped trying to explain myself months ago, after she'd started dating Derek. Derek. The reason for everything. He'd moved in 4 months after meeting Mom on some dating app. A software consultant with an easy smile and a habit of standing too close when he talked to you. Mom had been lonely since Dad left when I was 14, I understood that. But Derek had changed her, or maybe just revealed something that had always been there, buried under years of shared routines and unspoken truces between us. "Derek thinks you're manipulating me," she continued as she turned onto our street. The brick townhouse we'd lived in for 7 years came into view, its porch light already on. "He says you're playing the victim to make me feel guilty about finally being happy." I never said. "There you go again." Her voice cracked and I couldn't tell if it was anger or something else. "Everything is always about you. Your feelings. Your plans. What about what I need?" The car jerked to a stop in the driveway. Through the living room window I could see Derek's silhouette on the couch, probably watching sports highlights like he did every evening, his feet on the coffee table Mom had refinished last summer. I'd tried to be invisible these past few months. I ate dinner quickly and went to my room. I didn't bring friends over. I'd even skipped the graduation party at Miguel's house tonight, knowing Mom wanted me home. But it was never enough. "I got accepted to Penn State," I said, my voice barely audible. "The financial aid package came through. I'd only need to take out small loans and I could work part-time." "Penn State." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ethan, you can barely keep your room clean. You think you're ready for college? You think I'm going to co-sign loans so you can party and fail out? I have a 3.7 GPA. I've been working at the grocery store for 2 years. With my car. My insurance. Living under my roof, eating my food." She turned to face me, and in the dim light of the car's interior, she looked older than I remembered. "Tired. Derek's right. You're 18 now. Legally an adult. Maybe it's time you learned what that actually means." The words hung between us like smoke. Outside a dog barked. Someone's sprinkler system clicked on with a mechanical hiss. "What are you saying?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "I'm saying maybe you need to figure things out on your own for a while. I've been doing this alone since your father left and I'm exhausted. Derek and we're talking about getting married. Starting fresh. And I just..." She closed her eyes. "I can't keep carrying you. Carrying me." As if the past year of walking on eggshells, of making myself smaller and quieter, of watching her choose him over me in 1,000 tiny ways, had been me burdening her. "So what am I supposed to do?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Figure it out, Ethan. That's what adults do." I sat there for a long moment, waiting for her to take it back, to say she didn't mean it. The clock on the dashboard read 9:47 p.m. My graduation night. I'd imagined celebrating with Mom, maybe watching a movie and eating too much pizza like we used to before Derek. Instead I was being told to leave. "Can I at least pack?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Of course. I'm not a monster. But she wouldn't look at me as she said it. The house felt different as I walked through it for what I somehow knew would be the last time. Derek didn't even glance up from the TV as I passed. Mom went straight to their bedroom and closed the door. My room was small, painted the same blue it had been since I was 12. Band posters covered the walls. Nirvana, The Strokes, Arctic Monkeys. My desk was cluttered with college brochures and scholarship applications I'd been carefully organizing. My laptop sat open to an email from Penn State's admissions office, welcoming me to the class of 2016. I grabbed my hiking backpack from the closet and started filling it mechanically. Clothes. Toiletries. My phone charger. The photo album from before Dad left. My laptop and the small emergency fund I'd been building from my paychecks. $8.47 in cash hidden in an old shoebox. It wasn't much, but I'd been saving for college expenses. The diploma fell out of my backpack as I was packing. I stared at it for a moment, Ethan James Morrison in formal script, then left it on the bed. I was zipping up my backpack when I heard their voices through the wall. Mom and Derek, arguing in sharp whispers that carried through the thin drywall. Overreacting. Derek's voice. My decision. Mom's voice, defensive. Done now anyway. I left through the front door without saying goodbye. Mom didn't come out. Derek didn't look away from the TV. The June night had finally cooled, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd played basketball until dark, where I'd lived my entire childhood. I walked toward the bus stop at the end of the block, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, and I didn't look back. Not once. The 24-hour diner near the Greyhound station became my base camp that first night. I nursed a cup of coffee until 3 a.m., using the free Wi-Fi to search for options. Youth shelters. Job listings. Cheap rooms for rent. The overnight staff, a waitress named Carmen who looked about 60, kept refilling my cup without comment as if she understood without being told. You okay, honey? She finally asked around 4 a.m. when I was the only customer left. I will be, I said, and I almost believed it. By dawn I had a plan. Not a good plan, but a plan. I'd take the bus to Philadelphia, where rent might be cheaper and opportunities more plentiful than in Pittsburgh. I'd find work, any work. I'd survive. Penn State felt like a dream from another life now, someone else's future that I'd glimpsed for a moment before it vanished. The Greyhound pulled out of Pittsburgh as the sun rose, painting the steel bridges in shades of gold and amber. I watched the city shrink in the distance, and I felt something inside me shrink with it. The part that had still been a child still believed that mothers don't abandon their children, that family means something permanent. I was 17 years old, technically still a minor for another 2 months, with less than $850 to my name and nowhere to call home. But I was free. That terrible, terrifying freedom was all I had left. Philadelphia greeted me with indifference, which felt appropriate. The city didn't care about my story or my pain. It simply existed, vast and grinding and full of people fighting their own battles. That first week I stayed in a hostel in Fishtown, sharing a room with 6 other transients. A musician from Brazil, 2 college students backpacking through the Northeast, a middle-aged man who never spoke about why he was there. I spent my days walking the city, learning its rhythms, applying for jobs at every restaurant, retail store, and warehouse that would take an application from someone with no address and no references. Previous employment? The managers would ask. Giant Eagle grocery store in Pittsburgh. I'd say. 2 years part-time. Can we call them for a reference? I'd give them the number, knowing that my former manager Steve would say good things. But then came the inevitable question, current address? I'm in transition, I'd say, which was technically true and completely inadequate. Most didn't call back. On my 8th day in Philadelphia, my money down to $623, I got hired at a sports bar in Center City called Madigan's. The owner, Sean, was a gruff ex-Marine who looked at my cheap resume printed at the public library and said, "You look hungry. When can you start?" "Right now," I said. "You got a place to stay?" "Working on it." He studied me for a long moment, then scribbled an address on a napkin. "My cousin rents rooms above a pizza shop in South Philly. Tell him Sean sent you. First month is $400, utilities included. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe." That room, barely bigger than my childhood bedroom with a single window overlooking a narrow street, a mattress on the floor and a hot plate for cooking, became my sanctuary. The walls were yellowed from decades of cigarette smoke. The radiator clanked through winter nights. But it was mine. I worked doubles at Madigan's, pulling 50, 60-hour weeks. Lunch shifts, dinner shifts, late nights cleaning until 2 a.m. My hands developed permanent burns from hot plates. I learned to smile through harassment from drunk customers, to move fast during rush hours, to read the room and know when someone needed their check and when they needed to be left alone. Sean became something like the father figure I'd lost, gruff but fair, quick to criticize but quicker to defend his staff. When he found out I'd been living on ramen and peanut butter, he started, accidentally, making too much staff meal every shift. "Might as well eat it," he'd grunt, sliding a plate of pasta or a burger toward me. "Can't let it go to waste." I didn't try to contact Mom. Not that first month, not the second. I told myself it was pride, but really it was self-preservation. I'd check her Facebook sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, scrolling through photos of her and Derek at restaurants at the beach looking happy. She never posted about me. Never asked where I was. It was as if I'd never existed. The silence was its own kind of answer. 6 months in, I enrolled in community college classes, using the staff meal money I'd saved to cover tuition. Just 2 courses that first semester. English composition and Introduction to Business, taken at night after my shifts. I'd show up at 8 p.m. smelling like French fries and beer, exhausted but determined. My English professor, Dr. Patricia Okafor, a Nigerian woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, pulled me aside after my first essay. "This is good work," she said simply. "Why are you at community college instead of university?" I gave her the abbreviated version: family issues, needed to work, taking it slow. She nodded, asked no further questions, but started recommending books, offering feedback on my writing, treating me like someone worth investing in. It was a small thing, but those small things, Sean's meals, Dr. Okafor's attention, the librarian who let me study past closing time, they were the threads that kept me stitched together. The first year was survival. I learned to budget down to the dollar, to shop at discount grocery stores, to wear layers in winter because I couldn't always afford to heat my room. I learned which street corners to avoid, which bus routes ran late, how to recognize when someone was following you in the dark. I also learned I was stronger than I'd thought. That I could wake up after 4 hours of sleep and work another double. That rejection, from jobs, from girls, from a system designed to grind down people without safety nets, didn't have to break me. By the second year, I'd been promoted to shift manager at Madigan's. The pay increase wasn't huge, but it was enough to move to a slightly better room, one with its own bathroom and a real bed frame. I took 4 classes per semester now, maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working 40 hours a week. Dr. Okafor wrote me a recommendation letter for a scholarship program for non-traditional students. I won it, $3,000 toward tuition. When I told her, she smiled in that restrained way of hers and said, "I knew you would. Don't waste it." I didn't. I still thought about Mom sometimes. On my birthday, which passed unmarked. On Thanksgiving, which I spent serving turkey dinners at Madigan's to families who looked so comfortably intact it physically hurt. On random Tuesday afternoons when something would remind me of her. A song on the radio, a woman's laugh, the smell of her perfume on a passing stranger. I drafted 100 emails to her in my head, ranging from angry to pleading to coldly informative. But I never sent any of them. What would be the point? She'd made her choice. I was making mine. 3 years in, I transferred to Temple University with a partial scholarship and a mountain of student loans. I moved into a shared house near campus with 3 other students. Paulo, an engineering major from Brazil, Jennifer, a pre-med student from Ohio, and Marcus, a philosophy major who played guitar at open mic nights. They became my chosen family. We studied together, cooked together, covered each other's rent when money was tight. They knew vague outlines of my story, complicated family situation, and respected my boundaries about not asking more. "You're allowed to not talk about it," Jennifer told me once after Paulo had asked about my parents and I'd deflected. "You don't owe anyone your trauma as explanation." That simple permission, to have a past I didn't have to constantly explain or justify, felt like a gift. By year 5, I'd graduated from Temple with a degree in business administration. Sean came to the ceremony sitting in the family section like he belonged there. Dr. Okafor sent flowers. My roommates threw me a party. Mom didn't know. Didn't show. Had no idea. I'd stopped checking her Facebook years ago, had blocked her number, had severed every connection. It had taken me 3 years to stop jumping every time I saw a silver Honda, to stop composing imaginary conversations with her in my head, to accept that some bridges don't just burn, they disintegrate completely, and trying to rebuild them would require more materials than either party possesses. I got hired as a junior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. The salary was modest but stable, $42,000 a year, which felt like impossible wealth after years of scarcity. I kept my room at Madigan's part-time, picking up shifts on weekends because I couldn't quite trust that the stability would last. "You don't have to keep doing this," Sean told me one Saturday night as I was closing up. "You've got the degree, the real job. You made it out." "I know," I said. "But I like it here. Reminds me where I came from." He nodded, understanding what I couldn't quite articulate. That Madigan's wasn't just a job, it was proof. Proof that I'd survived. Proof that kindness existed. Proof that I'd built something from nothing. Years 6 and 7 blurred together in a montage of professional growth. I changed firms, got promoted to senior analyst, moved into my own studio apartment in Northern Liberties, a neighborhood I'd once thought impossibly expensive. My salary climbed to $68,000. I started investing small amounts, building the security I'd once thought was only for other people. I dated occasionally, though I struggled with trust in ways I couldn't fully hide. I'd meet someone, things would go well, and then I'd inevitably sabotage it by pulling away the moment they got too close. A therapist I saw briefly, covered by my new employer's health insurance, said I had abandonment issues and complex trauma around attachment. I said, "Yeah, no kidding," and didn't go back. The truth was simpler than clinical diagnoses. I'd learned that even the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally could choose not to. And if my own mother could discard me, what chance did anyone else have of staying? 8 years after that June night, I was 25 years old. I had an apartment with actual furniture, a career trajectory, a small but solid circle of friends. I ran marathons now, had joined a recreational basketball league, had traveled to 5 different countries on budget trips that I'd saved for meticulously. I'd built a good life. Not the life I'd planned at 17, not the conventional path with family support in college right after high school, but a life I'd earned through sweat and stubbornness and the kindness of people who owed me nothing. I thought I was done with Pittsburgh. Done with Mom. Done with that chapter entirely. Then on a gray November afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Pennsylvania area code. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Hello. Silence on the other end, then a voice I hadn't heard in 8 years, thinner and older but unmistakable. Ethan. It's Mom. I need your help. The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. Outside my office window, Philadelphia continued its indifferent march. Traffic, pedestrians, the grinding momentum of a city that didn't care about my past surfacing to swallow me whole. I should have hung up. Should have said no. Should have protected the life I'd built from the person who'd shattered the life I'd had. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'm listening." She sounded smaller on the phone. That was my first thought. That somehow across 8 years and 200 miles, my mother had shrunk into something fragile and uncertain. It didn't match the person I'd built up in my memory, the woman who'd chosen a man she'd known for months over a son she'd raised for 17 years. Ethan, she said again, like she was testing whether my name still worked in her mouth. God, I don't even know where to start. The beginning usually works, I said. My voice came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften it. I was standing now, pacing the small kitchen of my apartment, watching the afternoon light slant through the window. Jennifer, my old roommate who'd become my best friend, was supposed to come over for dinner in 2 hours. I had chicken marinating in the fridge. Normal life waiting to resume. I know I have no right to call. I know that. Pause. The sound of her breathing unsteady. Derek and we got married. 5 years ago. Congratulations, I said flatly. We're getting divorced. I waited. There had to be more. People don't call after 8 years of silence to share news you could find on Facebook. The house, our house, the one you grew up in, we remortgaged it 3 years ago. Derek had this business idea, some tech startup. He convinced me to put up the house as collateral. Her voice cracked slightly. It failed. The company went under and now the bank is foreclosing. I'm going to lose everything. I processed this information clinically like it was a case study from work. Assets, liabilities, risk assessment. My mother, who'd once managed our household budget with careful precision, had gambled her home on a man's dream. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it and not meaning it simultaneously. But I don't understand why you're calling me. The house, she said. It's technically still in both our names. When your father left, we'd put it in my name and yours for tax reasons. You were a minor and the lawyer said it would help if something happened to me. I meant to change it after you left, but Derek kept saying we didn't need to, that it didn't matter, and then everything got complicated and I just never. Understanding arrived like a punch to the gut. You need my signature to sell, I finished for her. The lawyer says the bank might accept a short sale if we act fast. It won't save the house, but it would prevent a foreclosure on my record. And there's a couple interested, but they need an answer by next week. I need you to sign the deed transfer. I laughed. A short, bitter sound that surprised even me. You're calling me after 8 years because you need something from me. I know how this looks. How it looks. Mom, you threw me out the night of my graduation. You cut me off when I was 17 years old. You didn't check if I was alive, if I was safe, if I was sleeping on the street. I could have been dead in a ditch somewhere and you wouldn't have known because you never once tried to find out. I thought you were with your father. Dad died 6 years ago, I said. Heart attack. I know because his sister tracked me down through my community college records. I flew to Cleveland for the funeral. You weren't there. But then you hadn't spoken to him either, had you? Silence. Then, I didn't know. Ethan, I swear I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to ask. I was surprised by how steady my voice was, how all the rage I'd carried for years was coming out as ice instead of fire. You chose Derek. You chose yourself. And now that it's convenient, now that you need something, suddenly I exist again. I made mistakes. Her voice was thick now, tears or guilt or both. I was scared. After your father left, I was so angry and so lonely, and Derek made me feel wanted. And you looked so much like your father, and every time I looked at you, I felt like I was failing. Like I'd failed at marriage, failed at making you happy, failed at everything. And when Derek said you were manipulating me, it was easier to believe him than to admit I was the problem. It was the closest thing to an explanation I'd ever gotten, and it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I'm not doing this, I said. I'm not rehashing 8 years of damage over the phone because you're in crisis. You want to talk, you want to explain, that's fine. But not like this. Not when you're only calling because you need something. Please, Ethan. I'll lose everything. I don't have anywhere else to go. The irony was so sharp it could cut. I thought about my first night in Philadelphia, sitting in that hostel, counting my money and wondering if I'd have enough for food and rent. I thought about my room above the pizza shop, the winter nights when I'd slept in sweatpants and 3 layers because I couldn't afford to run the heat. Figure it out, Mom, I said, throwing her words back at her across the years. That's what adults do. Ethan. I need to think. Don't call me again. I'll call you if I decide to help. I hung up before she could respond, and then I stood there in my kitchen, my hand shaking slightly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The chicken needed to be checked. Jennifer would be here soon. Life was waiting. But all I could see was that June night, the way she'd looked at me in the car, the way she hadn't come out to say goodbye. Jennifer arrived at 6:30 with wine and sympathy. I'd texted her the basics. Mom called after 8 years, needs something, don't know what to do. And she'd responded immediately, on my way. With alcohol. She was a surgical resident now, perpetually exhausted but somehow always available when people needed her. She sat on my couch in her scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID, and listened as I told her everything. The graduation night, the years in between, the phone call. Jesus, she said when I finished. That's Jesus, Ethan. I know. Do you want my objective medical opinion or my subjective friend opinion? Both. She took a long sip of wine. Medically speaking, that level of sudden parental rejection in late adolescence causes significant psychological trauma. The fact that you're functioning as well as you are is actually remarkable. Most people with your history would have. She stopped herself. Let's skip that part. Friend opinion. She doesn't deserve your help. That's what I thought I'd feel, I said. But now I just feel empty. Like I used up all my anger years ago and now there's just this void where it used to be. That's probably healthier, actually. She studied me with those sharp diagnostician eyes. What do you want to do? I genuinely don't know. Okay, different question. What would make you regret your choice? I thought about it. If I help her, I'll regret feeling like I was manipulated by guilt. Like she used my decency against me. And if you don't help her? I'll regret, I don't know, not being the bigger person, letting her lose everything when I could have prevented it with one signature. Jennifer shook her head. That's not a fair framing. You're not letting her lose anything. She made choices. She's experiencing consequences. You didn't create this situation. But I can influence the outcome. You can. But that doesn't mean you're obligated to. We ate dinner. The chicken had turned out perfectly and talked about other things. Her brutal schedule at the hospital. The guy she'd been seeing who turned out to be married. Paulo's wedding in Brazil next summer, which we were all planning to attend. Normal life, friendship, the chosen family I'd built from nothing. But later, after she left, I sat alone in my apartment and pulled out my laptop. I searched for my mother's name on social media, breaking my own rule about not looking. Her Facebook was sparse now. No photos with Derek, none of the performative happiness I remembered from years ago. Her last post was from 3 months ago, going through changes. Taking things day by day. I found Derek's profile too. His relationship status was single. His profile picture showed him on a beach somewhere, tan and smiling, no visible signs of the business failure that had apparently destroyed everything. And there, buried in Mom's friends list, I found her lawyer's contact information. I emailed him, identifying myself and asking for details about the situation, the exact amount owed, the timeline, what my signature would actually accomplish. He responded within an hour with documentation. The house was underwater, worth $185,000. They owed $220,000. The interested buyers were offering $180,000, and the bank had agreed to accept the short sale to avoid foreclosure costs. Without the sale, foreclosure would proceed in 30 days. My signature was required because my name was still on the deed, a relic of financial planning from when I was 12 years old, before Dad left, before everything fell apart. One signature. That was all it would take. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just a name on a line, permission to end a chapter that had already ended 8 years ago. I didn't call her back that week. Or the next. I let the deadline creep closer while I went to work, ran my miles, saw my friends, lived my life. The question sat in the back of my mind like a splinter. Present, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Paulo noticed. "You're distracted, man," he said after I'd zoned out during a basketball game. "Everything okay?" "Family stuff," I said. "The family you don't talk to? That's the one." He dribbled the ball thoughtfully. "You know what my grandmother used to say? Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Whatever you decide, make sure it's for you, not for her." 2 days before the deadline, I called the lawyer back. "I'll sign," I said. "But I have conditions." The drive to Pittsburgh felt longer than it should have. It was early December now, the landscape between Philadelphia and western Pennsylvania stripped bare for winter, gray highways cutting through gray fields under gray skies. I'd rented a car, refusing Mom's offer to pick me up from the bus station. I needed control over when I arrived and when I left. Jennifer had wanted to come with me. Moral support, she'd insisted. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." But I'd declined. This was something I needed to face by myself, the way I'd faced everything else these past 8 years. The lawyer, Martin Kobayashi, mid-50s, with the efficient demeanor of someone who'd seen every family drama possible, had arranged for us to meet at his office in Shadyside rather than at the house. Neutral ground, he'd called it. My conditions had been simple. We'd sign the papers in the lawyer's presence. Mom would answer any questions I had honestly, and then I'd leave. No prolonged reunion. No pretending we could skip past 8 years of silence with a hug and mutual apologies. "This is a business transaction," I told him. "I'm helping her because it's the pragmatic choice, not the emotional one." He'd paused on the phone. "For what it's worth, that's probably the healthiest approach. Though I should tell you, your mother is hoping this might be a chance to reconnect." "Tell her not to," I'd said. Pittsburgh looked different. Smaller somehow. The neighborhoods I'd once known intimately seemed shrunken, like a childhood home you revisit as an adult and realize was never as large as memory painted it. I arrived early, parking across from the lawyer's office and sitting in the rental car, watching people pass on the sidewalk. Holiday shoppers with bags, students from Carnegie Mellon bundled against the cold, the regular rhythm of a city going about its business. I'd left here with $847 in a backpack. I was returning with a career and education, and a life I'd built entirely on my own. The asymmetry felt important. At exactly 2 p.m. I walked into the office. The receptionist smiled. "Mr. Morrison? They're waiting in conference room B." I'd assumed it would just be Mom and the lawyer, but when I entered the conference room, there was a third person. A woman in her 60s, Asian features, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ethan," Mom said, standing up from her chair. She'd aged, not drastically but noticeably. Thinner than I remembered. Grayer. Tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. "Thank you for coming." I nodded but didn't move to embrace her. Instead, I shook hands with Martin, who gestured to the unknown woman. "This is Dr. Susan Chin, a family therapist. Your mother asked if she could be present, given the complexity of the situation. I thought it best to inform you in advance that this would be optional." I looked at Mom. "You brought a therapist to a real estate closing?" "I brought someone who could help us communicate," she said quietly. "If you're willing. If not, we'll just sign the papers and you can leave." I should have been angry. It felt like a manipulation, an ambush disguised as support. But Dr. Chin spoke before I could object. "Mr. Morrison, I'm not here to mediate a reconciliation or to convince you of anything. I'm here purely as a neutral facilitator, to help ensure this conversation, if you choose to have it, remains productive and doesn't cause unnecessary additional harm. You're in complete control. If at any point you want me to leave or you want to end the conversation, just say so." There was something in her directness that I trusted. No performance, no agenda visible beneath the surface. "Fine," I said, sitting down across from Mom. "Let's get the papers signed first." The legal part took 15 minutes. Martin walked us through the deed transfer, the short sale agreement, the release of my interest in the property. I signed where indicated, my handwriting steady. Mom signed beside me, her signature shakier than I remembered. "And that concludes the legal requirements," Martin said, collecting the documents. "The sale should close within 2 weeks, Ms. Morrison. You'll need to be out of the property by January 15th. Mom nodded. "I have an apartment lined up. Small, but it'll do." Martin excused himself, leaving the three of us in the conference room. An awkward silence settled like dust. Dr. Chin waited, letting the discomfort exist without rushing to fill it. Finally, Mom spoke. "I don't know where to start." "Start with why you really wanted me here," I said. "Not the legal reason. The real one." She took a shaky breath. "Because I owe you an explanation. Because I've carried what I did to you for 8 years, and whether or not you forgive me, you deserve to know, to understand what was happening." "I understand what happened," I said. "You chose your boyfriend over your son. You decided I was expendable." "It wasn't," She stopped herself and I saw her physically regroup, choosing her words carefully. You're right. That's what I did. But it wasn't because you were expendable. It was because I was drowning. Dr. Chen spoke gently. Ms. Morrison, take your time. Ethan, listen without preparing your response. Just hear her. I sat back, arms crossed, waiting. When your father left, Mom began, staring at her hands. I fell apart. Not visibly, I kept going to work, kept